All right. God, we do ask that you would just restore a right spirit in us, God, and help us just to come here today and to lay aside all the things that might be on our minds and that are difficult. Maybe we certainly can't forget them, but God, we do ask that you would help us to find the context that you give us to place them in, Lord, and to understand that you're in control, and to understand that, God, that you love us. And you love us more than we can ever imagine or even think that we could be loved. And we're your family, and you're our Father. And God, we just ask that you would just help us to be sensitive to your Spirit's leading, guide us, and help us today. In your name, amen. Amen. There was a football player when I don't know if I was growing up, I was a little older. His name was Tony Gonzalez. You guys remember Tony Gonzalez? Of course. So, how many of you have no idea who Tony Gonzalez is? All right, I could be making this up. So anyway, Tony Gonzalez was a great tight end. And he was playing in an ordinary game, middle of the season, and he goes and he runs an out. And he runs out, you run out, and then you head toward the sidelines. They threw him a good ball, he caught it, he tiptoed out of bounds and went, and all of a sudden, there's a volunteer guy that holds the sticks. You know what I'm talking about? I don't know what the official name is. Stick holder? I don't know. But, what's that? What is it? Chain gang? So one of the chain gang, volunteer guy, minding his own business. So all of a sudden he looks up, and here comes 250-pound, solid muscle Tony Gonzalez coming right at him, hits him. He has no control, goes straight back, hits his head, he's out. Tony Gonzalez feels terrible. He runs over to him, they're trying to get him up, and he's in bad shape. They get an ambulance, they rush him to the hospital, and he has a concussion. That's bad, right? I mean, that's bad, and that hurts. How many of you have had a concussion before? How many of you have had a concussion before? I've had a few. So we just called them bumping our heads back in the day, and then we would eat a salt tablet for some reason and go back in the game. I'm not sure what that was all about. But at any rate, so now I have high cholesterol and a terrible memory. But the thing is, a concussion's bad. But the thing is, they took him in there, this ordinary guy, minding his own business, that Tony Gonzalez could have hit anybody on the sidelines. Half of them have pads on it wouldn't matter. But they took him in, and they took him in to get a CAT scan just to make sure everything was all right. And they found the beginnings of a cancerous tumor that if they wouldn't have found during that time, they couldn't have done anything about in just a few short months. And they were able to get that out of his brain, and he lived happily ever after. You know? Sometimes our plans aren't God's plans, and sometimes our plans go in an entirely different direction. I want to preach to you this morning about not a normal course of action. Not a normal course of action. You guys remember last week when Paul was in the ship and everything was getting haywire. They were in the middle of a storm, and they tried to go about 6 miles and ended up getting blown way off course, 600 miles or so. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But they end up on this island. Malta is what the Bible says. They end up on this island, and it wasn't their plans. It wasn't what they had originally wanted to do. It wasn't their course, but it ended up being okay. So here's the first thing I want to talk about is a snake. So they land on this island. So here we go. Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. Now, this is interesting. Do I want to give it away now or in a minute? Do it later. We need to preach on the dangers of rock music. That's what we need to do. So, okay, I'll give it away now. Give it away now. So, once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. If you're visiting here, I'm so sorry. But there's an island called Malta in the Mediterranean Sea. But there's also an island in the Adriatic Sea called Melita. And they're both, their names in Greek are very, very close together. And the thing about the island of Malta in the Mediterranean that we looked at last week is that there are no poisonous snakes on that island. So it would be a great island to go to if you ever have a chance, I'm guessing. But the island of Melita does have a very poisonous snake on the island. And so a lot of people think that they didn't go to what we call Malta today, but they ended up, because the Bible last week said that it was in the Adriatic Sea. And so that makes sense, that's possibly that they would have been at this other island that's very similar in name. And it's the interesting thing about this island, it has a bull-nosed viper on it. And the bull-nosed viper is the most dangerous, the most poisonous snake in Europe. The bull-nosed viper. And the thing about this viper, it's very docile. It actually hibernates when it gets cold, which will come into the story, I think, in a little bit. And it does something different than any other snake does. So normally, anybody here, by chance, has anybody here ever been snake bit? You've been snake bit. You've been snake bit. What? Oh, you've been all over the place. What kind of snake bit you? You got bit by a cobra? How many of you don't believe he's been bit by a cobra? He's on our missions team too. So, where were you in Oregon that you got bit by a cobra? Bangladesh, Oregon. Bangladesh, Oregon. That's the very southern tip of Oregon, by the way. No, that's wild. That sounds like a good story, but we'll save it for later. All right, so when you get bit by a normal snake, and you would know, you saw it up close, that they strike. They strike and they get back in their defensive position, right? And I've seen snakes do that, but I've never been bit. Staying away from the outdoors for the first 50 years of my life helped a little. But this particular bull-nosed viper hangs on. It bites because it's not a very aggressive snake, but when it does bite, it hangs on as tight as it can to inject as much venom as it can, so you'll just leave it alone. It's not trying to bite you multiple times. It's not necessarily trying to eat you or anything else. It just wants you away, and it'll actually hang on, which makes me think that this island is a good possibility for this particular story, and you'll see here in a minute. So, back to the snake. Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta, okay? They had no idea where they even were. Remember, they just swam up on parts of the ship, basically, and just got up there, and all 276 of them survived, amazingly enough. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. Now, that's awesome because they didn't have to do that. These were strangers coming up and a bunch of them. And instead of being hostile, instead of feeling threatened, these islanders, out of the kindness of their heart, decided they would show them grace and show them hospitality, and they built them a fire, and because it was just nasty outside, because that was what they were in. It was about probably like mid-October at this particular time, and it was raining and cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. It didn't strike him, it just hung on. And this particular bull-nosed viper, it's what it does. And it got roused up by the heat, and could have been hibernating in that pile of bushes when he picked it up, and when it got hot, it's like, I'm out of here, and it bit Paul. And under a normal course of events, that's bad news. That's bad news for Paul. He made it all this way. You know, he survived the shipwreck. He made it out of everything. He survived multiple shipwrecks. He survived getting beat. He survived everything else he survived. And all of a sudden, he gets bit by a very poisonous snake. And what's going to happen if the normal course of events happen? Paul is dead. Right? When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer. For though he escaped from the sea, the goddess justice has not allowed him to live." Like, oh, bummer. He's so close. But they thought, because they had seen the snake, they knew what happens. They knew the normal course of events. And if the normal course of events plays out, Paul is going to swell up, his veins are going to fill with poison, and his organs are going to shut down, and he's going to drop dead. And it's not going to take very long. All of us have maybe ourselves or people in our lives that right now, they are headed in a direction that if we can project out their lives and we can see the future, if we can put two and two together and figure out their lives under the normal course of events, it's not going to end well. It's not going to end well. How many of you think of somebody when I say that right now? You think of somebody. It's not going to end well. The way it's going right now, it's not going to end well. There are people in my life that I had someone very close to me, going in a certain direction that I thought this is just going to be terrible. There's no way this pans out. There's no way this straightens up. Because I've seen all the stats. I've seen all the facts. I know what happens. And when you're going through something like that, you understand that things like that often end bad. Things like addiction. Things like relationship issues, things like a lack of discipline, things like, you name it, whatever it happens to be that people are going through that leads inevitably somewhere. Matter of fact, I had a conversation this morning that somebody got in a situation where they had to grow up really fast. And a lot of times, if you look at the statistics, that causes life to be very, very difficult under the normal course of events. Aren't you glad, I am, that we serve a God who created our normal course of events and therefore can interject and use the normal course of events that would normally lead to an inevitable conclusion and change that conclusion however He sees fit? All of us have had somebody in our lives that we've had to go, I can't do anything. I'm done. I'm out. For safety, for boundaries, for a lack of trying, whatever it is, for your own sanity, you've had to say, listen, I can't do anything else for you. I'm here for you, but I'm exasperated. I'm out. Something's got to change. Paul gets bitten by a snake. It's hanging on him, which has to be an interesting visual, especially if you're Paul. You're sitting there with a snake hanging off you with fangs embedded in your skin. And the islanders all going, oh boy, that's it for that murderer. What's Paul do? But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. Say, well, the snake was out of venom. The snake, you can think of anything you want to do, but the truth is what happened is God changed the normal course of events. He did. He got bit by a poisonous snake, and he just shook it off and kept on doing what he was doing, I assume. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he screamed like a banshee and ran around the fire. I don't know. They didn't record that part. I assume he just shook it off and kept doing what he was doing. I know what I would have done, but that's what he did. So he just shakes the snake off and keeps on going. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god. Okay, there's some theological issues with that last part, but let's work from the top down. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead. Why? Because that's what naturally happened when the snake bit you. We serve a God that enables us to never have to give up on anyone, because he can do anything. He can take any circumstance that we think is going to inevitably go sideways and use that circumstance to change somebody's life in a way that we could have never dreamed, so that it changes the entire trajectory of their life, and we thought it was going to destroy them. Or just pile on to the point that the camel's back was going to break. Right? But we serve a God who is above all of that. And not only that, he created us, and he created our normal. He created the fact that the sun goes up and the sun goes down. And then the moon goes around the earth. Make sure I guess the sun stays there and we circle. I can't remember how it all goes. But as the sun stays there, we go around, but we're spinning. And then the moon spins around us, and it happens every day. Happens every day. Every time we get up. But there was one time, Joshua and his army, the Israelites, needed some more daylight. And God's like, okay, I got this. And he stopped the sun until the battle was over. And it's like, all right, keep going. You know how, if the world stopped turning, I think it's bad for us. I'm not sure. But if the sun stayed still, or maybe the sun, I don't know what happened, under the normal course of events, that would have been disastrous for every human being and every living thing on the earth. But because God is above it all, God's like, don't worry about it. I got it. I created all this. I know how it works. He is above the normal course of events, and he's above and transcends all that because he created it and he can do what he wants with it. And no matter how inevitable your life looks or somebody else that you love life looks, it is not impossible with God. It may be impossible with us, but with him, all things are possible. Because he doesn't have to take a normal course of events. Paul gets snake bit, he shakes it off. They're like, they go from thinking he's a murderer and he's going to die, and the goddess Justice got him, to thinking he's a god in like 45 minutes. All right, so that's phase number 1 on this island. Phase number 2, we see the sick. The sick. Man, I don't know what to do with sickness, to be honest with you. I don't know what to do with it. The thing that makes me, can I get honest about how I feel? I don't know. It's a good question. Good question. Stop putting it back on me, Dennis. All right. But here's the thing. The thing that I think is the most beautiful thing about God, that I love and that causes me to be able to rest and have peace, I believe, is the fact that he's sovereign. The fact that he's sovereign, that I know he's in control. Because there's so many times that I realize I'm not. Right? There's so many things that remind me that I have zero control. It's like anytime my kids are traveling, it's anxiety for me. I don't know why, but I have a hard time relaxing until I get that call that, hey, I made it. Or they pull in the driveway. Or until I know they're going to leave. So, anyway, that's kind of a new thing for me. But anyway, but at the same time, that same sovereignty is a thing that almost drives me crazy. is the sovereignty of God. You know what I mean? It's two-edged sort of. Because if something happens to you that's out of your control, you get sick, you get a diagnosis, you get something that happens, or you're not feeling well. A lot of you have heard this. I've got a bad pinky right now. How many of you have heard this story? Wait, it gets bad. If you're a doctor, I need some free advice. I just don't want to pay for it. I'm sitting there one day, and Eric's back here. He's interested in this. He's shaking his head. He's heard this every day. I had this Band-Aid on for 5 weeks. I had a blood blister pop up on my pinky. Tiny pinky. And I know better than that because I don't do a whole lot of manual labor, so I wasn't sure how I got a blood blister. But I was rolling with it. I'm like, look, Joy, I'm tough. I got a blood blister and 1 callus, so I'm good. So I'm sitting there one day, and I get out. I take a shower. I get out of the shower, and I look around, and there's blood everywhere. And not everywhere, but there was blood. Any blood is too much blood after a shower, all right? So I'm sitting there, and I'm trying to figure out what in the world's bleeding, what happened, what let loose, what's going on. I didn't know, and I look down, and my finger's gushing blood. And I'm like, gushing blood. It's not gushing blood. It's bloody, right? This, yeah. I barely survived. So anyway, I crawled out of the bathroom, found a Band-Aid. But anyway, we got 15 more minutes. I'll stretch this out. So, but it was bleeding, and I couldn't get it to stop bleeding. And so I put a Band-Aid on it, and next day, same thing. Next day, same thing. Next day, same thing. There's a perfectly circular hole in my finger that bleeds every single day. So if you know what that might be, if it's bad news, keep it to yourself. If it's something we can figure out, let me know. But it's a gusher. So anyway, I don't know what that is. I don't know. I get belly aches. And I'm like, uh-oh, is there something in there? I don't know. I think those might be abs. I can't remember. But there's a pain right there that comes once in a while. I don't know what it is. You never know, right? You never know. And sometimes when something happens to somebody, or you see someone go through something, or you go through something, you're like, why, God? Why? The same thing that gives us the ability to be like, okay, God, you got this, is the same thing that it'll keep us up at night sometimes saying, why? Why us? Why them? Why are they going through this? I don't get it. I don't get it. Sickness is hard because, you pray that someone will be healed, and somebody gets healed and somebody doesn't, and you're like, but then something else gets them. I mean, Lazarus was really sick, dead sick, and he went to the grave for 4 days. Jesus raised him from the grave. He died later. Sometime will get us, And seeing people go through tragedy, and seeing people go through difficulty, and seeing people go through pain and sorrow and all these things that happen, the same thing that brings me comfort sometimes brings me grief in a way, or questions. But here we see Paul and sick. I don't know what I did. There it is. Did I mention my pinky, by the way? There was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius. I don't know if that's right or not. The chief official of the island. He welcomed us to his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. Remember, if it says us, Luke is included in this venture, right? So they go and they're hanging out at the officials, the chief official of the island, his house. He welcomes them there. His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Now, dysentery, if you don't know, is a horrible way to die. A horrible way to die. You don't have vitamin C. You don't have enough nutrients in your body. A lot of times, people on ships would get this after their supply of fruit would run out, and they wouldn't have anything, and they would get dysentery, and your body can't digest anything properly, and it just runs straight through you, and it just dehydrates you and kills you. And that's what his father was sick in bed. And you guys know, I mean, it's rough to see your loved one sick. It's rough. It's rough to see your loved one sick. And sometimes I think it's almost harder on the people than it is on the one that's sick. It's harder on the loved ones in some ways because you don't know what to do. It's hard. And so they go in, he's suffering from something he's not going to get better from, most likely, in the natural course of events. But Paul comes in. Paul went in to see him, and after prayer, placed his hands on him and healed him. And again, that would be an awesome thing to be able to do. And sometimes I genuinely believe, even now, God does that. Through a doctor, through a circumstance, through just going to sleep and waking up the next morning, whatever it is, that God heals today. I believe that. I don't believe people that are going out and making a show of this and trying to make a bunch of money healing people. That doesn't do anything for me, and I know enough about that to know that a lot of that has nothing to do with anything, and I don't like that, but that doesn't mean I don't believe that God still does this. A friend of mine, that Joy and I got engaged in their house. She was diagnosed with really bad cancer and went, and it disappeared for a whole year. Just disappeared. The doctors couldn't believe it. I remember her husband called me, or I called him to check up on her, and he was over the top. God healed her, and he did. Came back the next year, and now she's with God, so she's really healed. You know what I mean? So it's all working together for good. It's just really hard sometimes. But in this particular instance, Paul went in after prayer, placed his hands on him, and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. Everybody that was sick came and they were cured. You see, God doesn't take the normal course of events. Doesn't have to take. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it goes exactly the way things are supposed to go. But it doesn't have to. Not only do we not have to give up on anybody who may be out there doing something that seems like it's inevitably leading to a bad path, we don't have to give up on them. We can have faith and hope for anybody on earth because God is a miracle-working God. But we don't have to give up on somebody that's sick either. We don't have to give up. But here's the beautiful thing. If God decides to take them, they got all the way better. Right? I mean, we've all gone through that. We've gone through people here that are Christ followers that go through this process. And man, when they die, it's not a goodbye, it's a see you later. And that's always an amazing, amazing place to be able to rest in the midst of the grief. Right? We never have to give up. God is not bound by the normal course of events. When this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. Everybody. Now, we see the supplies. Here's the other thing, that they needed stuff. They tossed all their stuff away when they were in the storm. They had nothing. And because of God using all these crazy events and doing all this crazy stuff and having Paul survive his snake bite and having all these people that were sick getting healed, their supplies got met. Their needs got met. It says they honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sell, they furnished us with the supplies we needed. Their needs got met because of God's unusual methods of working. We were young and dumb. Joy and I were married, and right after we got married, we took a job in West Virginia as I was a youth pastor, and Joy was there for support. And we were doing our thing, and it was a horrible situation, and we hated every minute of it. Loved the kids, still have a good relationship with some of the kids, but man, it was a rough go. Just trying to learn and all these expectations that I didn't know how to meet, and I was just a kid, and just, I'm sure some of it was my fault and some of it was someone else's fault, I hope, because it was bad. But we're at the end of our rope. We're at the end of our rope. And I have no idea what to do. I was done with ministry, I knew that much. Like, somebody else can have this mess, getting paid nothing and working like this and getting yelled at every 5 minutes and everything. I'm done. I'm going to go do something productive. And so we were looking at different things, and we decided that we were going to move out to Pasco, Washington, because her mom and dad lived there, and we were going to move in with them. They were thrilled, and Joy was 6 months pregnant, and we were going to go out there before we made any major life decisions. We were going to move all the way across the country, 6 months pregnant, and we loaded up the car, Beverly Hills Billy style, and took off. And that was the plan. The last youth trip we went on, we come back, and our car had been broken into. Our car, the windows shattered, door messed up, and we had a Lumina, not a van, but the car. I don't know if you remember them, but it was just I was at the end of my rope. I remember being so angry. We had a bag phone stolen. You guys remember bag phones? That was the height of technology, man, and it was gone. They took my debit cards, which wouldn't get them very far at that particular time, but still, someone invaded my space, someone broke my window. They decided not to even tell us because we were on the trip, and they just put a plastic bag, the church people just put a plastic bag in the window and decided they didn't want to mess with us while we were on the trip and didn't tell us till like 5 days. It was just, I was at the end of it. I remember driving home that night and screaming at the top of my lungs, like, what's happening? I am done. And so we called the insurance company. The insurance company said, what we'll do, they came out and assessed it. They said, we'll give you $2,700 to fix your car. And back then, they just cut me a check. And a guy in our church came up to me and said, you know what's funny is my son, a couple years ago, totaled the exact same car that you have. Not the same car, but the same looking car. Same color, same interior, same everything. And the only thing that wasn't damaged was the driver's side door. He said, all I have to do is pop the hinges off, pop a couple cords out, and I'll just put that back on for you. And it'll look just like it fits. Like, no way. Now I got $2,700 and a good door. So we're moving. I call the moving company. He says it's going to be $7,000 to move us out. I was like, well, I've got $2,700. He said, hang on a second. He came back. It's going to cost $2,700. I should have said something else. I just, paid for it. That thing that drove me crazy, that made me want to quit and just jump off a ledge and call it a day and thought I was at the end of my rope and thought that was the last straw and made me literally almost crazy, was the very thing God used to get us out here. We started a church. We were in Hermiston, Oregon. We started a church, and we were in this little church building. It used to be a Christian Science reading room, and it was just this old building that had really old wiring in it, and it had a Black Widow issue, and it had all kinds of other things, and we were starting a little church there, and we were trying to plug along. I planned this big event. We went out and passed out a bunch of flyers, tried to get a bunch of people in, tried to do a bunch of stuff, trying to get a crowd in. That morning, I walked in, and I was super excited. I had my suit and tie on, and I was ready to go. And I walked up. 10 people showed up. I walked back into the bathroom, and I had one of those, like, Forrest Gump moments with God. Not Forrest Gump, the captain with no legs, whatever. Lieutenant Dan, that was who it was. When he's up, and he's like, God, why did you get me in this? I just had it out. Why have you done, what is happening? I was so angry. I was so mad. Just nothing. And the church was failing, and it was all over. And I walked out, and I'm sitting there, and I'm getting ready to preach at the people about everybody else that didn't show up, which is always a great idea. And this one woman, her name was Margaret, her and her daughter came in. They walked all the way up front. I'll never forget this. And front row was like right here, and I was right here. Danger zone, big time. They walked up, they sat down, and I watched them. They did not care if it was just us and them. They just wanted to hear something about Jesus. And that moment that I was so angry because nobody showed up changed my entire life. And I said from that moment on, if they're here, I'm here. If they're willing to do this and they're willing, then I'm all in. And God did some amazing things. Normal course of events, you got 10 people coming to church, your church is over. Normal course of events, your car gets broken into, it's a bummer, and nothing good comes of it. Normal course of events, you get sick with something and you die from it. Normal course of events, you get bit by a snake, you're dead. Normal course of events, you get somebody pregnant in high school, you're addicted to drugs, things aren't going to go well. But God is not bound by our normal course of events. We cannot, must not, don't have to give up on anybody or any circumstance because we serve a God who's above it all, who can stop the sunshine, who can take any circumstance, any bunch of ashes, and raise from it something beautiful. So let's get out there and let's serve God and let's just watch what God will do. And when we get to the end of ourselves, maybe we just peek around the corner and say, God, you up to something? Because I bet He is. I bet He is. Dear Heavenly Father, God, help us. Lord, we are in this situation where we can't see past this moment. We can't see forward at all. All we can do is have your word to light our path and to trust in you. But God, you have the luxury of the long view. God, you know what's coming around every bend and every corner. And so, God, I just ask right now for the ones that are going through the storm, for those that are going through the situations where you just throw your hands up and you're like, I don't know what to do, or it seems so impossible, God, I just ask that you would help us to remember that you're not bound by any of it, that you created it all and your love transcends it all, and God, you're capable of any and everything possible. God, we trust you. We love you. Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we get frustrated. Thank you for allowing us to be that way, but also thank you for working and allowing us to see you work in your miraculous and amazing ways. Thank you for not taking the normal course of action. In Jesus' name.